Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I want to dive into Christian nationalism. A piece just aired on CNN talking about how it's a growing movement within the country. And ironically, I actually wrote about this a couple years ago. I started writing on Medium, kind of take it more seriously back in 2022. And I will say this piece that I wrote it from a very liberal perspective. My whole transition out of liberalness has kind of taken place from 2021 and culminated to a conclusion like 2023. So I'm honestly very fresh out of the whole liberal ideology, feminism, all of that stuff. So I thought it'd be interesting to unpack this piece in the context of the other piece that was recently published by CNN, because this is something I personally have been aware of for a long period of time. And while my views on this have shifted a bit, I think this is something worth paying attention to because it sheds light on the direction we're going in as a country. So let's dive into this.
Pastor Doug Wilson is a self-described Christian nationalist on a mission to make the United States a Christian nation and the entire world a Christian world. Over the decades, he's built an international network of more than 150 churches. And last month, he opened a new one just 3 blocks from Capitol Hill, with the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, attending the service. Pastor Wilson preaches a strict interpretation of the Bible. He believes women should submit to their husbands and not have the right to vote. In his view, abortion and homosexuality are criminal. He's been on the fringe.
So if you've been following some of the stuff I've put out, I have actually put out some pieces recently about my, not necessarily opposition to the 19th Amendment, but I'm certainly starting to question it. And then obviously I'm very critical of feminism, and I do believe that women should submit to their husbands. But I think the interpretation of that is very misconstrued. I think all of us submit to some higher authority. If you don't submit to a higher authority, it's nihilistic anarchy. Like what is your appeal to authority if not, an employer, a spouse, a moral code, a religion? Like what is your, like where do you exist in the social and natural order of things? You're kind of your own boss. And I don't know that that's how humans are meant to be. I think we all submit to something. So for the feminists watching this who find offense to the idea of submitting to your husband, I mean, if you go to a 9-to-5 employer, you're submitting to them as well. So the idea that, you shouldn't submit to a husband, but it's okay to submit to an employer in exchange for a paycheck, it is just absolutely ludicrous to me. Like, you're not escaping the whole submission piece. And even, again, all of us, even as a country, right? Like, we submit ourselves to the authority of, local and state and federal, law enforcement or, political governance or the rule of law, right? We're all submitting to something. So the way this is framed, it's, obviously they use it in the Chiron here. It's biblical patriarchal system. I think words matter a lot, and you have to unpack what that actually means beyond just what they use in the headlines.
Fringes of the religious right for decades, but now finds more of a mainstream Republican audience. CNN's Pamela Brown reports.
Christchurch senior pastor Doug Wilson makes no apologies for his beliefs on God and country.
I'd like to see the town be a Christian town. I'd like to see the state be a Christian state. I'd like to see the nation be a Christian nation. I'd like to see the world be a Christian world.
And now Wilson's controversial views as a Christian nationalist are gaining sway in the nation's center of power with the recent opening of his new church and high-profile parishioners like Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
Is planting a church in D.C. part of your mission to try to turn this into a Christian nation?
Yes. So every society is theocratic. The only question is who's theo. In a secular democracy, it would be demos, the people. In a Christian republic, it'd be Christ.
Well, what would you say to someone watching this to say?
So I wouldn't necessarily agree that every single country or every single state is theocratic. I think a belief system has to shape the way that your country emerges, but it doesn't necessarily have to be religious. So, for example, Iran is probably one of the most well-known theocratic states. It's governed by Shia Islam. You could argue in practice, the state of Israel is a theocratic state. There's a lot of appeals to Talmudic and, Old Testament law. But other than that, I mean, you could argue that, the Soviet Union and Russia under communism, like that wasn't a theocratic state, but it was, you subordinate yourself and you submitted to yourself to a structure of governance and a belief system of, workers' rights, the proletariat versus bourgeoisie, Marxist thinking, but the workers' society, workers' utopia. In China, historically, up until, the CCP took over, it was very Confucian and legalistic. In sub-Saharan African societies, you have a lot of, mystical beliefs and ancestor beliefs and things like that. So I wouldn't say that everything is theocratic, but I do think a belief system of some sort or some sort of organizational principle underpins almost every single modern society. And that organizational system, it could be founded in religion. It could be founded in nationalism. How your economy and the political system that emanates from that economy and the culture that comes from that economy. So there's all different types of ways to organize yourselves. But I do think there is one central organizing principle that governs most societies, and where you don't have cohesion in those organizing principles, you have conflict. And so I think that's kind of what they're getting at with the whole Christian nationalism thing. Over the years, we've seen a degradation in kind of the narrative and the myth and the belief and the ethos of what it means to be American. It doesn't mean you need to go to church every single day and you need to believe every single thing that the Southern Baptist Convention, for example, believes, or that everything that the Methodists believe or the Catholic Church believes. But it's this idea that, as America appeals to, say the Ten Commandments as a general code of honor and ethics of how we behave. We love our neighbor as ourselves. We treat others as we would like to be treated. And this whole idea of, in the New Testament in particular, it's, Christ loved the church and serving, serve the poor, serve the needy, but also, admonished and rebuked those who overstepped and abused their powers and all sorts of things like that. So, I think people take this out of context and they assume that everything's just going to be the literal beliefs of the Bible. And I think it's more of just an organizing principle of morality. And then from that morality spawns, free market capitalism and the American dream and this idea, because if you love your neighbor as yourself and you respect your neighbor, or you treat others as you want to be treated, you can engage in commercial transactions. You can build a business, right? Back in, I like to use this example, It's a Wonderful Life, fantastic Christmas movie, but that gives you kind of an idea of a way of American life that used to exist that no longer existed. A huge subplot in that movie is the idea of big, mean banker kind of exploiting poor people in a small made-up town in upstate New York versus, local Bailey, the Bailey family. The Bailey Savings and Loan is this family-run enterprise, and they give loans to people out of the goodness of their heart because they had, the customers had integrity. You had an existing relationship. They were your neighbors. You could trust them, right? So we had a high-trust society that wasn't based on everything it's based on now. You didn't have to have a FICO credit score to get a loan. You could get a loan with your name, right? And so when I talk about this, it's that is downstream of the morality. So if you have a morality system that says, do not lie, do not cheat, do not steal, love your neighbor as yourself, then you're able to get access to capital markets based on trust and your name and your reputation, right? And so that's my interpretation of when people talk about we need to go back to a Christian nation. I don't think it's literally saying if you're any other religion or you're an atheist or whatever, you can't practice. It's we need to get back to a common core set of principles and values and ethics that we all agree upon, and it kind of leads to the same outcome. So in the story of America, that is a high degree of social mobility. That means you could become Andrew Carnegie. You could be an Andrew Carnegie, come over from Scotland, you're deeply impoverished, you go to Pittsburgh, you work your way up, you become one of the most important people in the Reconstruction era and early 20th century industrialization of America, right? Like, you become fundamentally important to the existence of America as it is today by nothing but just working hard and putting in the effort and trying. And not a lot of other societies can say that. I think that's what makes America fundamentally unique. But for that to happen, for America to be able to exist like that, we have to have a high trust society. And I think that has degraded because people don't buy into the American dream anymore. We don't have a shared set of ethics and morals and values. For some people, murder is okay. For other people, it's not. You can lie, you can cheat, you can steal. And so this is my interpretation of what this is getting at. And so I just wanted to lay that out right from the get-go.
Look, I'm a Muslim. Who are you to say your worldview is better than mine, that your God is better than mine?
Well, if I went to Saudi Arabia, I would fully expect to live under their God's rules.
But you said earlier that you want this to be a Christian world.
Yes.
So
just like an aside as well. So I lived in the Middle East for a period of time, and I lived in a Muslim dominant country. Christianity wasn't outlawed per se. There were a couple of small churches. I actually went to a couple services once, and there were Orthodox churches. So it wasn't like you can't practice Christianity, but it was a Muslim dominant country. And I will say my observation living there is that it wasn't necessarily the Quran that was dictating how people behaved. It was the tribal nature of society. So women didn't like there was a blending of tribalism and religion, right? So women didn't necessarily cover their hair with hijab. Where I lived, all the women wore jilbabs, which were like long overcoats. You didn't dress like that necessarily because the Quran literally said you must cover your hair and wear jilbab. It's because that was kind of the cultural expectation of that society, and it was a very patriarchal, male-dominated society, and it's just how women dress. And honestly, the thing that really struck me when I lived in the Middle East is I saw a mirror image of American society that I wasn't expecting. So in the same way we criticize Muslims for wearing hijab and covering up, in the United States, it's the exact opposite. Like, I was running downtown in Austin yesterday going for my run, and every single woman on the running trail was like half naked. And I'm guilty of this. I love my, leggings too. But I've just started to pick up on this more and more. Like women have been pushing the limits of what they can get away with. And now if you go to the gym or any sort of, see people wearing athleisure clothes, it's just gotten tighter and skimpier, and you're almost not wearing anything, right? And so we criticize people for being modest. We criticize, other religions for oppressing women and being modest, but then we are immodest over here. So the other side of the same coin, and we celebrate that, right? And so how you interpret your society is very subjective. And yeah, the religion can inform it, sure, but other things inform it too. So in the same way that expectations around modesty shaped how women dressed where I lived in the Middle East, here in the United States, feminism shapes how women dress in the United States. Women are increasingly more revealing and increasingly less modest because feminism has told them the best way to celebrate their independence is to kind of just wear whatever they want and show it all off to the world. So it's two sides of the same coin. And I hate the double standard that we apply, especially here in the United States. And we're like, this leads to oppression. This leads to this leads to that. When we're doing the same thing, but in the opposite direction, and we call it progress, we call it liberation, and we call it freedom.
So you want to supplant their religion with your Christian?
Yes, by peaceful means, by sharing the gospel. There's a lot of work yet to do. I believe that we are working our little corner of the vineyard.
Wilson's Little Corner, a picturesque campus nestled on the outskirts of downtown Moscow, Idaho, is growing by the day with thousands of like-minded Christians. Parishioners of his church, known as Kirkers, own and operate several businesses downtown, next to liberal college town stores.
If it's true.
Why did he yell boo? Because it's
because of me.
Because of you.
Yeah. Well, you there you go.
That's a regular day for you.
That's not unusual.
A big focus of his Christian movement is on a patriarchal society where men are dominant and women are expected to submit to their husbands.
Women are the kind of people that people come out of.
So you just think they're meant to have babies? That's
Well,
it. They're just a vessel.
No, it doesn't take any talent to simply reproduce biologically. The wife and mother, who is the chief executive of the home, is entrusted with 3 or 4 or 5 eternal souls.
I'm here as a
So I've said this before, right? And I'm not a Christian nationalist. I try to think of myself as rational and objective. Yes, I did grow up in an evangelical church, so I can add a layer to this and an insight to this. But I don't identify with this at all. But even I see how important it is as, women as CEOs of their households and how we have diminished that. Like, running a household is no easy feat. It's no different than a business. Like, you have a budget, and if you have savings goals, you have to, make sure you have a delta at the end of each month, each quarter, each year to hit your savings goals. Just in the same way that a CEO is trained to look at certain lines on their balance sheet to cut costs, a woman who's in charge of her household and presumably running the household budget is going to have to look for certain lines to cut and things to budget for. And so, like, that's a huge responsibility. And then a lot of stay-at-home moms, a lot of housewives also have businesses too. And again, we don't talk about this in culture. We don't celebrate this. So it's interesting because she's clearly, this journalist is clearly offended by all of this. But there's no recognition of the work that women do inside the home. And then, of course, the guy here, he talks about how, mothers are entrusted with raising souls. And, like, we don't think of it like that. We in the current context of American culture, we look at raising children and giving birth to children as a punishment, as a burden, as something that's, for this person in particular, is something that's going to hinder my career. It's going to set me back. It's very negatively framed. It's not even seen as, wow, I have an opportunity to create the next generation. Wow, I'm giving life to something and I have responsibility over something. We don't even see it as something to celebrate. So again, my perspective on this, not necessarily the Christian nationalist fundamentalist version, but it's like, okay, the feminist project has clearly failed. Okay. You have women who are more than ever on SSRIs. They're in debt. They're alone. They can't afford the rising cost of living in the cities they've been pushed into, right? Like, everyone wants to say that the feminist project is winning and it's succeeding, and it's clearly not, right? And if feminists don't reproduce, which they're not, like, it's going to end up dying out. So it's a very fatalistic prescription to an invented problem that I don't think really ever existed. And so all this guy is doing, and I think what a lot of folks, like more conservative and religious folks, are trying to do is to elevate the status within society. So return the moral values that make America succeed and make America thrive. Restore women and restore the value that women have in society. Yes, that is having children. Like, that is fundamentally what makes women so special and so valuable. I don't think feminists understand, at least my understanding, but most men elevate women above themselves, right? And so feminists talk about trying to become equal to men, and they don't recognize that in order to be equal to men, they have to devalue themselves. So women were and always have been above men. That's why when you have, things like the Titanic that happened, natural disasters, it was always save the women and children, right? Because that was the key to, preserving and surviving the species, literally. Like, if all the women and children go, you have no more civilization. You have nothing left. So it's a super important role. And I do think we should stop diminishing the value that women bring to the home, bring to their communities, bring to society. And I think running a household is really important. It's fundamental. A lot of feminist women are clearly failing at that, and they're blaming the patriarchy for it. But I think it is valuable. And so I think all this comes down to is how you frame it, right? You can call it patriarchal, you can call it, Christian nationalism, or you can just kind of see how the world works and be like, okay, if I want to succeed and I want my family to thrive, I need to be good at these core skills and competencies. And if I treat my home like a business, I can thrive. Otherwise, I'm going to have to play the game of subsistence living, where I'm chasing a paycheck all the time. I'm submitting to an employer and I'm just barely keeping up. But, showing off all the pretenses of success for Instagram and social media. But in reality, a lot of women like this reporter, are just barely keeping up.
As a working journalist, and I'm a mom of 3.
Good for you.
Is that an issue for you?
No, it's not automatically an issue.
Josh and Amy Prince, along with their 4 kids, moved here from Washington State.
Do you see Amy as your equal?
Yes and no, in the sense that we're both saved by grace. We're absolutely on equal footing, but we have very different purposes, God-given.
But do you see yourself as the head of the household, as the man?
He is the head of our household. Yes, and I do submit to him.
So moving here
was
ultimately your decision.
Yes.
That's a great
example.
Wilson says in his video,
I personally love that. Again, I'm biased. I hate making decisions. I struggle with making decisions. I think a lot of women do. I don't think I'm an anomaly. And this is something I rejected for a really long time, because I bought into hustle culture. I watched Gary Vee ad nauseum tell me, I need to do X, Y, and Z to be a leader. And I bought into this whole concept that I had to be a leader. I had to be an alpha. I had to be dominant. And reality, that was so counterintuitive to my being. I don't need to try to become the next Elon Musk. That's never going to happen, right? I don't need to lead a 100+ person company to be successful, right? I need to do the things that I enjoy doing to be successful. Yeah, I think making money is a part of that, but I need to be able to find my vocation and commit to that, however that looks. So, doing YouTube is one of the ways I'm experimenting with that and seeing how that goes out. So far, writing has been a really good outlet for me. But I think the whole feminist narrative has been women need to be these girl bosses, which means they need to be equal to or superior to men. And that means, women have to make decisions, but women don't like to make decisions. And you see this in dating and just female behavior, right? How many times do guys have to consult their guy friends on who to date or what to do or what to wear? Never. Guys don't do that. Girls do that all the time. They, you take someone with you dress shopping, for example, or you consult with your friend about a big move. I've done this tons of times, okay? Always getting a second opinion, always consulting, always asking. So yeah, maybe the idea of deferring to someone else to make decisions, not that bad. And the assumption is, with that couple, right? But and others too, the assumption is that the man is always going to do things and never ask for the woman's input. And that's absolutely not true. If you're in a good marriage and you're in a good place and you're respected and you're not equals per se, but you're celebrated and valued for your authentic individual roles that you bring to the relationship. The relationships are about equilibrium, not equality. I think that's important to keep in mind. There's things men bring to the table. There's things women bring to the table that are fundamentally different. And when combined, I think they complete the picture. But when they compete with one another for supremacy, it creates problems. But the assumption is that men just make all the decisions and they never ask the woman for input, and that's never the case. It's not never the case, but most of the time that's not the case. The woman is giving the input. The woman is here. Okay, if this were a true patriarchal society, if we're talking Taliban level, she wouldn't have been sitting in this interview, right? Okay, all sorts of more conservative content creators, you can follow. Nick Freitas is a great example. I enjoy a lot of his content. His wife is always on his podcast with him. Okay, she's not equal to him per se. She submits to him, but she is also celebrated. Her intellect is valued. She has a role to play, right? Even within companies, right? It's often, we look to the chief executive officer as the most important person within a company. And yeah, they're kind of the ones directing everything. But the chief operating officer, the chief technology officer, the chief product officer, the chief revenue officer, all your C-suite executives are important too. And they wouldn't, the company wouldn't survive without those people. So it's a team effort, right? And different people bring different value, but there's no like inferiority. But yeah, you do need one person to make a decision. That's why, the CEOs get paid the big bucks, because they're that one person who makes the decision. And if that decision goes wrong, they carry the responsibility of that, right? And so because women don't like making decisions outside of, the input of the woman's sphere and the female tribe, women don't like to take responsibility and accountability for their actions. And I humbly confess to that. It's really hard to do. And so I think that's one of the things with this that gets lost, is you need a leader. You need someone who guides the ship, takes responsibility, and you see this replicated throughout other aspects of human created society. Like I said, companies, countries, we have a president, right? There's all sorts of different people, advisors, department secretaries that inform the president of actions to take. But at the end of the day, there is one person who makes those decisions, right? And so I think that's just, again, if you're looking at progress moving forward, getting things done versus anarchy, you need decisive leadership. Otherwise, you're just going to hem and haw, go around in circles, and nothing's going to get done. And so yeah, I mean, I think that's why I think that's why in this, structure and this conversation, why men are dominant. It's not that women are unimportant. It's just you need someone to be the leader.
Vision of a Christian society, women as individuals shouldn't be able to vote. His fellow pastors Jared Longshore and Toby Sumter agree.
In my ideal society, we would vote as households. And I would ordinarily be the one that would cast the vote, but I would cast the vote having discussed it with my household.
But what if there's your wife doesn't want to vote for the same person as you?
Right. Well, then that's a great opportunity for a good discussion.
There are some who have gone so far as to say...
So I have a whole separate video about this that I'll link below, but I've made this argument too. And it makes a lot of sense. One of the reasons why a lot of men are opposed to women voting, and this was something I hadn't considered until very recently, is that women don't put anything up for the right to vote, right? Women get to vote. I can go vote. And there's no cost to me. There's no consequence, right? I'm not expected to produce the next generation. I'm not expected to raise the next generation. I give absolutely nothing to the state, the country. A lot of women, your welfare queens, they actually just subsist off the state, right? So there are women out there who are voting. They're having all sorts of kids with all sorts of different baby daddies just so they can qualify for free housing and Medicaid and assistance and all that jazz. And they're contributing absolutely nothing to the country. On the other hand, men, every single man born after 1959 has to register for the Selective Service. So in the case of Vietnam, a draft was called and innocent young men were shipped off to their deaths just solely for being a man. Born and coming of age at a time when the country was in war. This could happen anytime in the future as well. If we go into war, it will be young men who die and not women. And the fact that women don't understand that burden or responsibility and we take voting for granted and give nothing in return, we think there's no obligation or duty to give anything to this country. I think that's why so many men are opposed to women voting, and frankly, I don't blame them. There's, women want equality. Okay, well, let's see some equality when it comes to times of war. Let's see women. Show me the feminists who are demanding that women be put into selective service, and then we can have equality. But so far, it's an unequal society, but women are still given the same privileges that men have to sacrifice for. And I also agree with the household argument as well. And that is purely objective, like bureaucratic. I think it makes total sense. When you file your taxes as a household. Almost all like census data and population data is collected per household. Like, yeah, you can break stuff down, but almost everything is reported, like household median income, everything is reported by the household. And so, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Why wouldn't you vote by household? And then, of course, the journalist brings up the point, well, what if the wife wants to vote for someone different? Well, that's fine. Like, have a discussion about it. Again, you are co-participants in your relationship. We're not living in Taliban Afghanistan here. Like, it's not like the man is only going to cast the vote and never ask the woman. If that's the case, you're in an abusive relationship and like, get out of there. What are you doing? But I think for most people, like, you're going to have a conversation. But the thing I really value with this perspective is that you wouldn't vote, like, divided households can't stand. So if your political differences are so different. Like, what are you doing? I don't understand how you can have a harmonious household if you have a raging feminist on the one hand and a conservative man on the other. It doesn't work. Where I see differences is maybe in primary elections, right? If you are registered with a particular party and you want to vote in the primary, sure, maybe there might be some differences there. Okay, maybe let's have a conversation on local and state-based voting, right? This conversation is within the context, I think, of federal, right? The federal government, national. There's nothing saying that women can't vote on like a local level or on, a state level, and especially when you have like primaries and stuff. But if it comes down to what we just saw in 2024 with Trump versus Kamala, if you are in a household where your husband is Trump and your wife is Kamala, like, I don't know how that can be a harmonious marriage, because those are just two very diametrically competing forces, and the values are fundamentally different. Like, Trump was elected on a specific mandate that is in direct opposition to everything that the Harris campaign was voting for, right? Let's use immigration as an example. I think a lot of people did vote for Trump on the basis of immigration. A lot of people support that. If you live in a household and say you live in a sanctuary city, right? If you live in like Los Angeles and your wife supports migrants and you don't, like, that's a very fundamental problem, because the issue isn't about immigration, contrary to what the media likes to spin it as. It's about people who have come into the country illegally, many of whom are committing crimes, and some of those crimes include stealing identities and social security numbers in order to get access to the labor market. So they're taking jobs from legal immigrants and other Americans, right? So you have someone who is abusing the country, right? They're trying to extract resources that they're just going to ship back to their families in Guatemala and Mexico and Venezuela. They're importing crime. We have seen a resurgence in crime, a lot of it related to the cartels and drug trade, right? So supporting that versus someone who values the rule of law, values citizenship, understands what it means to be an American, respects those who came here legally. Like, those are two very opposing forces. One is pro the country you live in. The other is not. And so if you live in a household like that, explain it to me, because I don't understand that. Like, I think, you can have your different opinions, you can have your different, thoughts on things, but there's some fundamental things you have to kind of agree on for a marriage to be successful. Like, you have to agree, like, okay, how do we identify in our country, right? Are we citizens of this country? Are we citizens of the world? Abortion, are we pro, ending life, or do we support life? There's just these very fundamental things that have transcended into politics that you should probably agree on if you're going to get married to someone. And if you don't have like a stable foundation on those core beliefs, I don't know what you're doing. And so I think that's what this is getting at. This is getting at the fact that, the man is the head of the household. The husband is the decision maker. The husband bears the burdens and the responsibilities of leading his household, and there should be some, roles to play with that. And one of those roles is representing his family at the federal level. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me. It's something, I hadn't considered until I started diving deeper into, the 19th Amendment, how it was passed, and all that kind of stuff. But I can see the guy's perspective, and I have yet to have to go do anything for this country. No selective service. I mean, I've worked in the government, and so I've done some service, but nothing compared to what young men have to do. And so why should I get the same vote that, a 20-something dude who has to register for selective service? Why do our votes get to be equal when his life is the first to go on the line and not mine? And feminism has told women like me, we have no obligation to this country. We have no obligation to the future. We don't have to raise families or, raise the next generation of citizens of this country. I think this is a fundamental question that more people need to start thinking about.
that they want the 19th Amendment repealed.
I would support that. And I'd support it on the basis that the atomization that comes with our current system is not good for humans.
And Wilson, a veteran himself, is unapologetic about his view that women shouldn't be in certain leadership or combat roles.
Looking at the leadership page for Christ Church,
Right.
It's all men. Do you accept women in leadership roles in the church and government?
In the church, no.
Why?
Because the Bible says not to.
Well, that's not what happens in the Bible. Women do lead all the time.
Progressive faith leader Reverend Jennifer Butler is concerned about Wilson's growing influence.
He is rapidly gaining in power. He has hundreds of churches established around the country. They actually literally want to take over towns and cities, and they have access to this administration.
Wilson is part of a broad...
Okay, this may be a bit of a controversial opinion. I was raised in an evangelical church. Women were not permitted in leadership roles. That is something as a teenager and young adult I very much hated. I was very opposed to that. It's one of many reasons that pushed me out of the church, because I hated the idea that, the patriarchy should tell me what to do. But kind of like I was saying before, I think there needs to be definitive roles for men and women to play, and a leadership role for men makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. It's interesting that they interviewed a female minister. She had the collar on, so I'm going to suspect she's probably Episcopalian or something along those lines. But the Bible is pretty clear. There isn't... You can't just, a lot of people like to cherry pick certain things and take certain things out of context. But, the Bible says, men, this is your role. Women, this is your role. Kind of is what it is. The thing that doesn't get talked about a lot is that, there were women in the Bible who played tremendously important roles. And it's not to say that women can't have a leadership role per se, but it's just not formally recognized within the decision-making process within a church. So let me give you an example. So you have formal and informal influences, right? So throughout history, there have been tons of women who have been incredibly influential. I forget her name off the top of my head. Nero's mother. She was an example in ancient Rome. Tremendously important in how Nero evolved, but also behind the scenes politicking and kind of making sure that things lined up in the right way. Throughout history, you have tons of powerful women who played either a formal role, Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth, Queen Catherine the Great. You have women who played important roles, but the society was usually structured around men. So there's exceptions to rules, right? They're not necessarily set in stone. But I think the problem that a lot of people have with this is that you take certain things out of context within the Bible, and then you kind of twist it and make it your own. And over time, the message of the Bible has been distorted. So if the Bible says, you shouldn't have women in leadership roles, man is head of household, women should submit to their husbands. Well, if you have female pastors who are being ordained and then saying, no, that's not true. Well, what else are they saying is not true, right? What else are they teaching? And I was curious, and I went to a couple sermons led by women, and my observation, a lot of it was feel good, fluffy stuff. It had nothing to do with what was actually being written in the Bible. I think, I remember going to a service in DC once, and the female pastor had a sermon about the 5 love languages. She was using a book to have a sermon. And I think there's a place for books, maybe a Bible study where you read a book and then you discuss it within the context of the Bible. I don't know that a Sunday morning sermon from the pulpit is the right place to talk about the 5 love languages. It was just kind of weird. But I think that's what this guy is getting at too. People like him are looking at the degradation of the church and the church teachings over time, such that it's becoming less and less Christian. It's becoming this new thing. And it happens in a church. You have ministers who are ordained by different Protestant denominations, but it's not fundamentally Christian. And so I think that's kind of what folks like him are opposed to, is they've seen when you surrender one when you make like you surrender one thing that the Bible says, or you make exceptions, right? Then it's a slippery slope to other things. So, it starts here, but then it continues to go here. I'm not saying this guy is good or bad. Like, one of my other gripes with evangelicals and then the church in general is there's kind of a hypocrisy. So, they also pick and choose what they're going to focus on. So it's like, okay, we're going to make sure we have strong male leadership. We're going to teach the teachings of the Bible. Well, gluttony is a sin, and this guy is overweight, So stuff like that. Or, you see scandals all the time of pastors, engaged in infidelity and stuff like that. So I'm not defending this guy. I think the evangelical side of Christianity has a lot of problems with it, but I understand the perspective he is taking here and why he is defending like a male dominated leadership roster. And again, there's exceptions to rules. Women have played important roles throughout history, and there are women leaders within churches. So they're not all docile handmaids doing nothing. Like they play important roles. The nursery, for example. Every church has a nursery, and it's all run by women. Sunday school teachers and all the educational stuff. Almost every educational staff, in every church I've ever been to has had strong female leadership. So it's not to say that women are playing no roles. Women play roles. It's just different than, I think, what feminists and secular folks expect them to play.
Broader Christian nationalist movement making inroads with the Trump administration, with a newly created faith office led by evangelical pastor Paula White Cain, and people seen right outside the White House entrance praying and speaking in tongues.
We are standing on the soil of the White House, and we are declaring your word.
How precious.
Okay, I have never been to a church that speaks tongues, so I don't know anything about that, but just listening to that clip, I didn't hear any non-English language, so if you did and I missed it, leave a timestamp or, call it out in the comments. I didn't hear anything weird about that. That's just me.
And now there's a monthly prayer service at the Pentagon, initiated by Hegseth, Wilson's highest level connection to the administration.
It's not organizationally tied to us, but it's the kind of thing we love to see.
For his part, Hegseth has publicly praised Wilson.
Now we're standing on the shoulders of a generation later, the Doug Wilsons and the others.
And as Wilson grows closer to the mainstream, the critics are also getting louder, accusing him and other Christian nationalists of wanting to create the dystopian world from The Handmaid's Tale, something he insists has never been his goal for society.
I'm not a white nationalist. I'm not a fascist. I'm not a racist. I'm not a misogynist.
How far off do you see a Christian nation, like a full-on Christian theocracy?
250 years.
250 years.
Yeah, honestly, that's yes.
What you see. But you do think it will happen?
Yes, I do. We're not going to usher in anything ourselves. We're really genuinely pioneers.
John, we reached out to the Defense Department to better understand the relationship between Wilson and Hegseth, and a DoD spokesman said that Hegseth is a, quote, proud member of the network of churches founded by Pastor Wilson, and he also said that Hegseth, quote, very much appreciates many of Mr. Wilson's writings and teachings. John?
Pamela Brown, thank you.
All right, so as you can see here, CNN didn't like that very much. I do think Christian nationalism is on the rise. It's kind of different flavors to it. But it is, I think, something worth paying attention to because, like I was saying before, I think people have seen that the postmodernist project has failed. Not just with regard to feminism, critical race theories, Marxism, all that kind of stuff. I think people desperately want a return to families and communities and some of the values that America was built on. People want to build things, right? People want dignity. They want jobs that give them, a connection to this country, a connection to their work. I don't think people want to be slaves anymore, clicky-clacking all day. People really want something different, and I think that's going to usher in a return to more traditional values. But more importantly, and we're seeing this with Gen Z, there's just a resurgence of young people going back to the church. And it's interesting because it's not just evangelicalism. You're seeing a rise in Catholicism and Orthodox Christianity. So I think young people desperately want structure. in their lives, and religion is a mechanism that provides structure. For me, it was, my social calendar, rules, do this, don't do that. And I think it served me well, honestly. I, am grateful that even though I hated some aspects of the church, I hated the male dominance. It also, I think, was to my benefit. Looking back, now that I'm in my early 30s, I think the church ladies were right. As much as I hated all of it, I think they were absolutely right. And so I think young people have seen the writing on the wall, and they want a return, or not even just a return, but they want the things that this country was built on, and they're willing to seek it out. And so I think you're going to see this stuff rise. So I want to call your attention. I wrote this back in 2022. And I said Christian nationalism isn't a threat to democracy. This was a kind of a tongue-in-cheek headline, but basically I was arguing that no one is talking about it. It's just this thing that has pretty much flown under the radar, and it's a growing problem, and it's something, to highlight it. I talked about how it was covered in the media, so you'll get more coverage for January 6th, QAnon, or, things like that in the New York Times or Washington Post than you would Christian nationalism. So the problem with a lot of these things is that because it's not being covered in the media, where a lot of people still get their information, unfortunately, if they don't cover this kind of stuff, or they don't cover it, within the right context, people aren't going to know what's happening, or, in this case, they're going to think that this guy is actually, I don't think he's actually trying to create a Christian theocracy. Again, what I was saying before, I think there's a general consensus that we need to return to some shared values. And I think the Christian Western-centered world has proven successful over time. So I think people want to preserve that. So I think that's what a lot of it is preservation. But I want to share this because I wrote this, and I talked about how I thought that Christian nationalism is an existential threat to American democracy, because I was once, when I grew up in a church and saw this kind of coming to fruition as a young child, and as a teenager. One of the things that really struck me growing up in the church was that Christians, especially evangelicals, perceive themselves to be persecuted. And I always thought that was just insane to me. We would always get Voice of the Martyrs, magazines, and I think sometimes they would come and do missions work. But we would always have Voice of the Martyrs stuff. If you're not familiar, that's an organization that tries to spread the gospel to countries where Christianity is prohibited. So places like China, places like North Korea, they will fly balloons with the gospel, or the first, the first 5 books of the New Testament. And they'll just try to fly them from the South Korean side and let them go to get to the North Korean side, things like that. But they always talked about oppression and persecution. And I always thought it was ridiculous, right? Because America was founded as a Christian nation, and at least not as a Christian nation, but on Judeo-Christian values, right? I think there's a pretty general consensus to that and how it informed the creation of the country, right? And so I always thought that was silly. But kind of now that my position has shifted, and I've taken, I think, a more, not necessarily conservative view, but a more critical view of the left, I've started to see why that is the case. So you just look at, Pam Bondi, or I forget her name, the communications secretary, who does all the press briefings, right? Sometimes they'll wear crosses, right? They're just, normal women wearing cross jewelry. I've seen countless examples, especially on X, of people on the left criticizing them for this, right? Criticizing them for what they wear, criticizing them for having a cross necklace. My problem is that there's a double standard there. You would never criticize Ilhan Omar, who's a representative from Minnesota, for wearing hijab. You would never. You would never criticize a Muslim woman for wearing hijab. You might say that Muslims are oppressed. You might say that they're not able to make their own free choices, but you would never demonize and criticize a Muslim woman for choosing to wear hijab, especially in the government. But the same isn't true for Christian women. It's okay to make fun of Christian women. It's okay to call them out. It's okay to say that they're, fascists and bigots and whatever. So for me, that's the double standard that is really hard for me to square a circle around. If you're going to be anti-religion, you have to be anti-all religion. You can't just cherry pick. And so I think, growing up, I didn't see Christianity as being oppressed. Now that I'm older and observing it from a different perspective, I can see why folks in my church felt like they were being oppressed and felt that they were being persecuted, because politics and church, whether we like it or not, has been inextricably intertwined. And while I don't know that, like, we don't have like a state-run religion per se, politics and religion do play a role. And while, you know, the conservative Republican Party has traditionally been a party representing Christians, the opposite is true of the left. And I think progressive liberal Democrats have created their own secular religion, right? And so we see that with different tenets they have regarding abortion and transism, gender roles, all that kind of stuff. So it's not just a rejection of religion. They've tried to substitute it with a secular one, and it requires the demonization of Christianity. So I don't think that Christians are oppressed to the extent that they are in, say, North Korea. But I understand politically why they feel oppressed and disenfranchised and why they're acting out the way they are in terms of moving forward with a Christian nationalist perspective. Okay. I think at the core, these people believe that the United States was founded as a Christian nation and that modern day Americans are deviating from our God-given birthright. I believe that is absolutely true, and that is something that they're holding out on. So for Christian nationalists, the reality is the truth, and that reality is shaped by men with prestige and power. That's really all it's about, ascension of Christian nationalists to power. Theocracy, if not by name, and practice is the only way they can safeguard their faith from subversion by the state. And so, again, you have to look at this within the current context. So DEI, for example, so you have the state, you have a secular religion that is competing with Christianity, demonizing Christianity, being heralded by your political opposition. That political opposition was just in power and was using state instruments of power and continues to do so to implement their agenda. So DEI, right? So Trump was like, no, we don't want DEI. Well, you still have people, and you've had leaks and all this kind of stuff coming out in the press that folks are trying to still engage in DEI activities, just not calling it that. So there is a real sense of subversion and the use of state instruments of power in order to persist with an anti-Christian agenda. So it's not even a secular, non-religious agenda. I do think that folks on the left are ushering in a religion. I do think their ideology is religious in nature, just not in the Christian sense. But they're ushering it in. They're using state instruments of power to cement the tenets of that religion. So, you know, this was written in 2022. I wrote, if Trump runs as the Republican candidate in 2024, which he did, he will either win or the election will be stolen again. A peaceful transfer of power is not possible under those two assumptions. So far, we have had a peaceful transfer, but I will say I think that the left has denied or is trying to deny him of his legitimacy. You know, you see this with leftist violence that has we've seen a rise in leftist violence over the past few months. Use of terminology like fascist and things like that. So Christian nationalism is here, and I said our democracy will die if we don't start shedding light on it. That may be the case. I think what we're seeing, and you saw this in France during the French Revolution, is when you have elements like this, very powerful elements on the fringes that become more and more mainstream, the pendulum is going to swing too far to one side. So I think the guy in the CNN piece and folks who are seeking a more traditional society, a return to stable values and a family-centered way of life, I think there's merit in what they say, and I think that appeals to a lot of people. But I do think, like, if you go too far to the right, you're going to have a Christian nationalist country, and that could be hard to rein in. But the same is true if you go too far on the left, you're going to have a highly atomized, so a highly individualized society that is susceptible to overreach by the state, that's difficult to protect, and you're going to have a loss of purpose and value. You're going to have anarchy and hedonism, and that isn't good either. So I think there has to be a balance. You have to come in the middle somewhere, and I think that is the struggle right now. It's not so much, contrary to what I say here, I don't necessarily agree that it's a threat to our democracy, but I think if we allow the pendulum to swing too far either way, that certainly is a threat, because I think both are very anti-democratic. Obviously, a Christian theocracy is not a democracy, and then the way the leftists have been going with their absolutist agenda, where you have to check all the boxes and agree to all the tenets, and there is no room for free speech, there is no room for deviation or discourse, I think that's bad too. So I think it's important to start talking about this. It's kind of flown under the radar until now, but CNN has obviously started talking about it. So, it seems to be a step in the right direction. I'd be curious to know what you think of all of this. If you've been paying attention to the rise of quote unquote Christian nationalism, or, a resurgence in religion and Christianity in the United States, and how that relates to the state, and some of your thoughts. I'm sure there's things I've said that you'll probably disagree with. So I would love to know kind of where your stance is on this, where you see us going, and the pros and the cons to a more traditional society. Do you think that's a good thing, or do you think we're on a good path as we are now and we should continue just progressing forward? I would love to know what you think about this. And if you found any value in this analysis, I would love it if you would follow, subscribe, like it, share it with anyone else in your network who you think might also find value in it. And I will see you in the next video.